Hey everybody, today we are working on a OpenText Server Backup Portal install. And this is going to be the full install from basically nothing to actually getting logged in for the first time and accessing the portal. If you don't know what Portal is, it's the management of the agents used to run the backups. You may know Portal as Evault Portal or Carbonite Server Backup Portal. And what we're working with today is the OpenText Server Backup Portal version 9.4. So this is, like I said, basically just a fresh install. I've just done some pre-downloads with this to make sure that everything is ready to go. One thing with Portal is that you have to have the prerequisites installed here. And for whatever reason, the Portal installer doesn't check for these prerequisites. So we're going to go through on each one of these and verify that everything's installed. We're going to be doing a single system, and the instructions here start with a distributed system. So we need to go down here to single system and kind of go through each of these items. Now, admittedly, this is a bit of a tedious process to be able to make sure that everything's here, especially since you got to jump back and forth for taking a look at the list of things that you have to take care of. So now that we've got all of these items checked here, let's go ahead and do this install. So we're going to make sure the portal is accessible by DNS here. And we could not get it by DNS. So let's make sure that we have it. I'm going to jump over to my domain controller. And you don't necessarily have to have the portal in your domain controller's DNS, but for my particular setup, I just made it easy by having everything in here. So on my domain controller, I'm going to add portal, and let's get the address for it. Okay, so I've got portal added into my DNS here. And so with PowerShell open, you can simply just do a ping to the DNS that you're going to use here. And so you can see here that I've got a good ping to that particular FQDN, which this is a good point to talk about. You're going to need, well, hopefully need a resolvable FQDN for your portal install. It is possible to use just the host name. If you ever wanted to use outside of where the server is located, it's not really going to work. There are certain components within Portal that you're going to need that FQDN. So I would suggest if at this point you don't have your FQDN available for whatever portal.company.com or whatever your FQDN is, then go ahead and get that figured out for what you want that to be able to be accessed from around the world, potentially in the future. You're kind of future-proofing yourself by doing it now. Now, this is just in a single lab that was never going to see the internet, etc. Sure, you could just give it a host name as long as it's resolvable within that lab. You could even do like I have here with a fictitious domain, or if you have a particular domain for your lab, you can also use that and use a unique host name within that lab, etc. But that is something that you're going to want to address before we do the actual installation of Portal. All right, now we have the installation succeeded for these components. And at this point, I'm going to move on to the .NET 4.8 installer. And now that .NET 4.8 has been installed, we can move on to the SQL install. All right, when this window comes up, we are going to do a new SQL Server standalone install. Now everything on this first window is going to be default. I'll scroll through for you so you can see everything that's checked. Now the named instance here is what we're going to use. SQL Express is generally what I like to leave in this field. It makes it much easier troubleshooting later that you know that this is the Express version of SQL instead of running any custom commands. But you can name it really anything that you want. Maybe you need something specific for your business or to differentiate this portal instance throughout the network. But for now, we'll leave it as SQL Express. And we are just going to leave this as default to install the OpenJRE. We'll hit next on that. Okay, and then in the user guide here, we do have where it mentions coalition. I apologize, I didn't pull this up earlier, but instance feature, the database, that's what we're installing right now. And the coalition is any case insensitive. So let's jump back there. The default of the SQL Latin 1 General CP1 CIAS, that works just great. And we're going to leave these other ones as default. Now for the authentication mode, I highly suggest doing a mixed mode authentication for it and entering a password here. This will allow you to keep your portal instance. There we go. It'll allow you to keep your portal instance independent of any of the network connectivity to, say, a domain controller and whatnot for this password. If it's needing to authenticate into the domain, you may be subject to certain password expirations or other password requirements that may not quite fit what we're doing here. Because if you're having to jump in every 30 days, every 90 days, whatever it may be, to update the password in Portal, that could be potentially problematic. Then again, that may be what you are wanting. And so the other option with the Windows authentication mode is that you can have a local Windows user and then update that password on the local box. But for the sake of simplicity in some of the configuration options for other components around the Portal install, the preference is to use the SA password and have that specified here. And I'll go through the other tabs here just to kind of show you that I'm leaving everything else here as default. You can definitely go in and change some of these parameters. So if you're wanting to have different disks store different components, different databases, all that fun stuff, you can do some of that directly here in the installer. Any limitations to the memory and all that fun stuff, but everything else is left standard. So I'll go ahead and hit next on this screen. So these packages are because in my lab environment, I am unable to automatically download these. So I need to go out to the websites and go get them. All right, those are done. So I'll just specify where that's at. All right, and that's it. We've got our successful installation here. All components are green. So we can close out of that. And I'll close out of this little wizard here also. And at this point, we are good for installing Portal. So we have the installation package here, and I'll just kick that off. And one thing I actually want to do before that, I have a PowerShell script that really I'm just trying to figure out how I'm going to get this distributed because it's got a whole bunch of checks. Now, this will have a bunch of red or orange, yellow, whatever, because there's some components that aren't installed yet, such as Portal itself. And then Windows 2019 has a couple things that are different than 2016. And this is in the middle being ported to 2019. Then we'll do the same for 2022, etc. But basically it's going through and doing individual checks for different system components that are required by the installation guide. So basically doing a bit of work to give me a good insight to make sure that everything is really ready to go. All right, so I'm going to scroll back up here, and it kind of just goes through saying, hey, yep, you have a supported operating system, your hardware is good. I'm not worried about the hard drive space just because this is a lab install. We've got our virtual processors. It does go through and check if an existing portal is there, and if we're doing an upgrade from a proper version, you can only go back 2 versions of Portal for upgrades. The .NET HTTP activation, that was one that was one of the differences between 2016 and 2019. So I'm going to come back to that particular component, but it's not going to impact the install, etc. It also did our 4.8, .NET 4.8, and it has confirmed that our SQL version is good to go. Now this is a little bit into the weeds of the actual install. Now it does not impact getting everything up and running, but there are some older Cypher suites that can be disabled and Portal will still function. And we haven't gone into IIS yet. That'll be after we get Portal installed, which is basically this whole section down here. So I'm going to just minimize this for now, and we'll go through the Portal install. Everything else is looking okay. And here we have what I was talking about with the SA password. This is where we put in a login ID of SA and that password. And I'm actually going to hit the back button on that one. We can hit test connection. Successfully established. Off we go. And in here, I do like to have this status installed. What that does is there's a status page available that you can query from different monitoring software to make sure that everything's okay as reported from Portal itself anyway. So it doesn't do it by default for whatever reason, but I like to have it in there, just make sure everything is included. Okay. And we're going to default here with the English United States. And this is where we have our FQDN needed here. So I'll type that in. And while it is possible to do HTTP on port 80, I highly discourage that just from a security perspective. Even with the self-signed certificate that we're going to add to the IIS on 443, even that's better than having the clear text of everything going over port 80. HTTPS, we're going to cover in this walkthrough doing the self-signed certificate for it and everything. So if you're going to do a full certificate, that's a little bit different, but very similar. But either way, let's move forward. I've got my FQDN in, and we'll hit next on that. And this is also one of those spots where you can select the other locations for some of these items if you wanted stuff on different drives, etc. Okay, and then we put in the FQDN here for the proxy. Now the proxy could be a different address, for example, in a distributed system. Or let's say you wanted to potentially future-proof this and you said, I want this to be portal proxy.company.com. You can, as long as that's going to resolve to the portal server or wherever the proxy may be later, you can. Generally speaking, because it's up to like 500 agents or something like that for the recommendation of a standalone portal, you're going to be fine with the same AMP proxy address as your portal because they both run on the same single instance of a portal anyway. There are processes to convert a standalone to distributed. That's a little bit outside the scope of this particular video, getting it kicked off in the first place. So I've got my address in here, and so we'll hit next. And then everything's done, so we will do the install. And there we have it. We are at the end, looking good for all components here. And then you can also save this particular output here. I'll just do that to my desktop. We'll take a look at it. So, same thing. Just gives you a little something you can send off to management or whoever saying, hey, look, everything went okay. And then it does give us some initial login information. And so that 3VLT1NC is what I'm going to need to make note of. Okay, so we can finish there. And then this is in regards to doing upgrades, etc. This is, you're going to want to back up your server anyway, and so you should be able to get to this in the future if needed. But that encrypted machine key in the web.config file, just make note of that for future use. So it does prompt us here to open the portal sign-in page. Normally, I mean, I guess you could. Oh, well, why not? Let's hit yes on that. We're not going to get anything. So we get this error, connection tunnel failed, which I knew that was expected because we selected the HTTPS, but we don't have IIS set up for it. So while I'm opening IIS, I'm just going to rerun this little script here. So what we're going to need to do is select our server in IIS. And we have a server certificate section right here in the middle. I'm going to open that up. And then on the right, we are going to create a self-signed certificate. And friendly name, let's just do this. You can name it whatever you want. It doesn't really matter. And it has the expiration date of, by default, for a year. Now, we're going to open up on the left side sites and go to our portal services website, portal website. I misspoke at first. Under the portal website, go to the right side and select bindings. Now you can see our HTTPS with our FQDN that we put in. We're going to edit that. And down here at the bottom, SSL certificate, we're going to select the certificate that we just created. We're going to click OK, close. All right, we've got the portal pulled up now. One of the things that I had to kind of mess with off camera here was that Brave was doing something funky with secure DNS and proxy, and I just said, I'm not going to mess with that. I went to Firefox, disabled the secure DNS and proxy settings directly in Firefox, and then it allowed me to continue to the portal. This is purely a lab environment problem and a display problem when it comes to company.com. Because with secure DNS, it wanted to reach out to the secure servers and say, hey, wait, is company.com supposed to be right here with this address? And it goes, nope. But in my lab, I want company.com to be resolved internally. So I had to bypass all of the... Anyway, point being, we're in here now, and I was able to get past that by disabling those two things. So now that we've got it fired up, we can log in. And that's going to be with that super username and the 3VLT1NC. Now this is the default password for all installs. Okay, I'll put in that old one, 3VLT1NC. And now that we've got that changed, we've got our first view into the basically the administrator console super user of the portal. Now, before we can do any management of agents, etc., we do have to set up a site and a user and stuff like that. That particular workflow is outside the scope of what I'm going to mess with in this video. I will touch base on like the global settings here, where you can do all sorts of customizations, logos, etc. You can make it all however you want for your site. My favorite is actually under the security preferences here. I will set this to custom, and I will change this timeout way higher than the default of that 20 minutes. More like, I don't know, 3 or something. I don't know, whatever it may be. I like it to be way higher because if I'm working on a project and then I come back and I have to log in over and over again, it can get a bit tedious. So I prefer to have that timeout set a little bit higher, just as a little tip for you. The other thing that you may want to do here is in your users, you can create a new user and say, okay, let's just say John.Doe or user A at company.com, and we can actually make that particular user a super user. So at that point, you can give this user a password at an actual company.com and not have to share the super password between multiple administrators. Once you've got logged in with this super user, you can then delete the generic super user or set it to some password that nobody knows and nobody can use it, etc. But that's something that you can do to help kind of secure down your environment or lock down your environment. Other than that, that's your full install. We've got this working portal now. As a final note, you probably will have to mess with the firewall to be able to allow the agents to communicate with it. Right now, my firewall is just completely disabled for getting everything set up. But in your advanced settings here, you will want to add an inbound rule. And so the agents, they're going to communicate on port 8086 and 8087 to your portal. So I'm just going to manually add those in now, allow the connection on all three of those, and again, lock down as dependent upon your environment. And I'm going to call this one here portal agent comms, but you can name it whatever you want. And I've got that in there now to be able to allow those agents to communicate in future videos. So, but yeah, that's everything for getting it all set up. And I'll catch you in another video for doing actual configuration of sites and users. So later.